And action. Hey everyone. Anthony had a question tonight, well, a couple nights ago, about what should I eat. And I actually got this again at a family party and again today from somebody on my portal with a really long message. And it's okay, send me the messages, but it's going to take me time. I sometimes see long messages and I say, ooh, that's too much time. I go to the next message. So just FYI, the longer the message, the more I'll have to review, the more I'll have to think about it, the longer it's going to take me to respond. So if you have long messages, come on in. It might be easier that way. So if this is the first time you're finding me, don't forget to subscribe. Oh, by the way, this is supposed to be a vegetable, a green vegetable. This is supposed to be a pork chop. So what should I eat? There's variations between meat eaters and vegetarians and keto, paleo, intermittent fasting, but we're going to try to talk about that. But before I say that, if this is the first time you're finding me, subscribe down below by hitting the button and hit the alert button to find out when I do these videos. I usually do videos for patients when I hear about a really cool question of the day. So this has been a persistent question, and Anthony, I wasn't sure what to say when do I eat this? Do I eat that? Should I eat? Can make a list of things to eat. It's kind of hard to come up with just one diet plan. In fact, when we try to pigeonhole patients into saying this diet plan is great or that diet plan is great, it's not one size fits all. Mostly because the reasons that people get to obesity or high cholesterol or high blood pressure or diabetes, the reasons are multifactorial. And it's taken decades for most of you guys to get to that point. So usually the easiest thing to say is don't do what you did before. And that's obviously, that's a cop-out because it takes more finesse to help guide somebody to where they used to eat or where they used to be before. Now, if you haven't hit a really good body mass index since you were in your 20s, well, it goes to reasoning that maybe time and stress and a lot of good money to buy expensive foods and not exercise has accumulated and gotten you here. But yes, metabolism being decreased, yes, poor sleep, and age and wear and tear and genetics can be unveiled. You know, genes can show up. If you keep on damaging a gene, the way a gene works is, if you keep on damaging a gene, eventually, as a gene replicates, it's going to get affected. And if there is a piece of that gene that says diabetes, it'll unveil itself and you'll be a diabetic. If you have a lung cancer in any of your genes and you keep on exposing yourself to nicotine and tar, it's going to expose yourself. But just the opposite with what Dean Ornish found, if you practice no smoking, calming practice, group therapy, nature therapy if you're a Seventh-day Adventist, or vegetarianism, low fat, mostly plant-based dieting, you can actually cover up that gene and not have it express. You're going to repress it. Herb Benson found that genes can change when you have a relaxation practice. Actually, Jeff, I think his name is Dusek, did some studies with Herb Benson in Boston to find that gene. He actually took the time during one of the lectures I attended about a decade ago to show how the genes would change in people who would meditate. So it just goes to show you that just because you have genes or disease in your family doesn't mean that it's going to have to express in you. I think there's ways to bring out the disease and the genetic abnormalities. There's also ways to repress it. So it's very important that you have a healthy lifestyle. So again, how do I manipulate food to decrease those gene expressions and also lose weight? Well, again, it's personal design. So Anthony, here's one thing. If somebody were to ask me about how to win at poker, and I would say, well, always get a royal flush. That's the end. I'll see you. Thank you. And you walk away. Well, the chances of getting a royal flush are very low. And if you do have a royal flush, you still have to take into consideration, you know, how the other guys gamble, how much you're using, if you have a tell, or if you, well, there's other strategies. So it's not just what's the best diet. So if I was to say, if I had a heart disease patient and I do, I have several. But if I have a heart disease patient that just suffered a heart attack, I would go with what is proven. And what's proven, at least in people who have had heart attacks and need bypass, is going backwards, like with the Ornish protocol, and trying to be on a mostly whole food, plant-based, a low-fat diet with group therapy, exercise, yoga, breath exercise, mindful practice. So that is kind of a deal breaker for a lot of my patients. In fact, the last guy that I had with a heart attack in the office automatically said it's probably going to be a tough call to go straight to veganism, and I have no problems with that. It is tough. In fact, I went from semi-vegetarian to vegan since then, and that was about 6-7 weeks ago, and going pretty well so far. I tell you, it takes a lot of planning, and so does vegetarianism, so does keto dieting. Every nutrition plan, if it's mindful, needs planning. And now as far as how detailed and how hard it is, well, nowadays there's a lot of places you can shop at. Yes, you have to have money, but it's either you spend the money on nutrition or you spend the money on your medical disease and your procedure that you're going to have done in 10 years. So whether you want to postpone it for 10 years, eat crappy food just because it's cheap, and then wait 10 years and pay $100,000 to $500,000. Now, even if that's the bill for a bypass, I mean, you will probably have, 10% of that? So that's still a chunk of change that you have to pay out of your pocket as far as co-pays. And I think insurance will cover you to a certain degree. Anyway, I would obviously say if you can pay it up front, then better off. If you can't buy fancy, then just try to do your best. Be selective. Don't eat meat so much. I really think that meat does cause problems. Now, for my guys that are doing keto, and there's a lot of wars on YouTube between keto practitioners and vegans. It seems to be really spurring on. It's kind of nice to see the arguments back and forth. And I don't know if I agree with either camps just yet, but again, if you have a medical disease, and I have a lot of patients in integrative primary care that I see that I try to make changes with, and I have a lot of successes. I'm not patting myself on the back, but I do use scientific method to evaluate what I suggest or initiate depending on the patient, but I am not married to one diet versus another. I really think it depends on the patient, patient's funds, patient's cooking talents, who the patient lives with, what the patient does for work. I've got a guy, Mike, who is coming to see me. He doesn't want to start insulin, and I wouldn't either, but insulin is a life-saving thing. If you're at the risk of having diabetic ketoacidosis or hyperosmolar coma, then you really have to bring that sugar level or the glucose level down, and insulin's a fast response. Unfortunately, insulin in the long run usually makes you gain weight. So if you can do it with nutrition, stopping tobacco, exercise, losing weight, then we do so. But again, that's easier said than done. Just like it is easier said than done to go from pure meat to vegan or vegetarianism. So we have to do it in baby steps. I'll tell you what I did. Because I had atrial fibrillation a while ago and IBS and fibromyalgia, I decided to go into vegetarianism, more pescatarian. So I eat fish, occasionally chicken, and mostly vegetables. Fruits, grains, nuts, seeds are my go-to. I avoid dairy as much as possible, but no question, when there's a Filipino party, I sometimes will dive into the lechon. I used to be able to dive into the lechon, just get that greasy stuff, but usually I would feel bad the next morning, either guilty or upset stomach, or a flare-up of acne. So I paid for it, and that's the reason why I stuck to a pescatarian diet. Now, since my friend and patient had the heart attack, I've gone vegan, and it's not that hard. So now I'm learning to cook. I've bought vegan books. It's not that hard. I'm finding that my protein, I supplement with hemp or brown rice or pea. For those of you who think you'll be missing protein just practicing a vegetarian diet. But again, if you have disease, then you have to change whatever you did before. So I can't just say one diet. I can't just say vegetarianism, because it's hard enough for some people to think outside the box as far as what to eat with fast food. And imagine I go straight to vegetarianism for suggestions. So if you're on a standard American diet, a standard Filipino diet, standard Indian diet. If you're on a standard diet, whatever you're doing before, number one, we try to decrease meat consumption. So I'd say on Monday and Friday, as best as possible, no meat, no animal products. That means no pork, beef, chicken, fish, eggs, or dairy. Now, and dairy includes cheese, yogurt, ice cream, and creamer. So if you can avoid that stuff and milk, and if you can avoid that stuff for Monday and Friday, and do that for about 2 months, that's a first start. Number one, if you're irritated by animal proteins, then getting 2 days controlled will be good. If you have a problem with volume, then being frugal on those 2 days is good. There's such a thing called the 5-2 diet, where you're fasting on 2 days and you're kind of eating okay for the 5. But the fast on the 2 days, which is supposed to be a low calorie intake, sometimes triggers a almost ketosis-like reaction where you start to burn fat instead of the fuel that you're missing out, and your body just becomes more efficient. So intermittent fasting is another one, but let's not talk about that. Let's just talk about dieting. So I would try to work with 2 days, and if you're successful for 2 months straight, then you work for 3 days. You might pick meatless Mondays, refried bean Fridays, and then a Wednesday in the middle as far as hump day. And that means you're doing 3 days out of 7 days that's meatless. Good results. Maybe not only just meatless, but decrease on the calories. And if you can make it by daisy chaining those days, you have cut out almost half the calories of a week. That means half the calories of a year. And just by cutting back on half the calories, I think you beat one of the most notorious problems is overeating. And you also, just by paying attention, you add mindfulness, and you're looking and seeing what you're doing as far as eating. You're being careful, and you're pacing yourself. You're holding back, you're restricting, you're refraining. That's one of the problems. The other thing I would suggest would be no more pop. Pop and high fructose corn syrup is just way too irritating. I think it backs up the liver. I think the fructose will easily break down into nothing that's useful, no fuel that's useful, and it'll just go and irritate the pancreas to get secreted insulin, and it'll cause that insulin dumping later on. Insulin is a nice hormone. All your hormones are good. But if you are stressing the pancreas out and making insulin spike for some reason, well, it's going to go somewhere. And usually what happens with a spike is you have a drop. And when the drop occurs, you become insulin resistant, or actually you become hypoglycemic, and you'll hunt for food, and you'll spike again, and you'll go down again. It's called an insulin drop. Once the insulin drop happens so many times, or the insulin spike happens so many times, then cells start to become insulin resistant. They ignore the signals, and then what's the pancreas have to do? It has to make more insulin. So it's a bad cycle of events. That's why you have to space it out. You can't eat too much. You should have a well-balanced meal. That would be my next. Every plate should be balanced, where half the plate is some kind of fiber. The other half is whatever you want, fat versus protein, but half of it has to be fiber. And again, if half of your meal, half of your box, half of your plate, half of your banana leaf, whatever you eat on, half of your sandwich, half of it is a fiber of some sort, a healthy fiber, greens, grains, legumes, beans, seeds, nuts. If half of it is that, then you'll at least have your plant source. And yes, I believe plant sources are important. I think we have to have plant sources. So the guys that just do nothing but meat and fat, well, you need plant and fiber to fulfill the probiotics in your gut so your gut works properly. There's no question about that. Check out the work of Justin Sonnenberg. So those little probiotics that are supposed to be in your gut, which are actually number the DNA in your gut from foreign DNA, outnumbers your true DNA. So you have to have that plethora. And if the gut is got those little fishies, and you feed the fishies fish food in the form of different fibers, everything is cool. If you just eat meats and fats, some of those probiotics that exist in you will die off, and some of the bad guys will grow up. And if they multiply and develop colonies, you might not do well with IBS. You might have ulcerative colitis, irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease might flare up. So I really believe that a well-functioning gut needs a mucus layer That's a biofilm. I don't think meats provide biofilms. I don't think fats provide enough biofilms. I think that you get that from vegetables. And then the probiotics that sit in the biofilm need food, and that's from fiber. Actually, there's a different fiber will give you a different plethora and growth bloom of a different probiotic. It's kind of cool. Again, Justin Sonnenberg, I'll see if I can put a link to previous videos. The other thing that you might want to, so we talked about cutting back on meat. We talked about cutting back on volume. Maybe adding more vegetables or watching the size of your plate. The next thing should be eating, and sodas. The next thing should be eating after a certain time. Now, in ancient times, with ancient, or I should say traditional Chinese medicine and Indian medicine, Ayurveda, you're not supposed to eat after a certain time. Like when you're getting ready for bed, you're not supposed to eat 2 hours before bed, because the gut is supposed to be quieting down. When digestion in the small intestine is supposed to turn on overnight, but the stomach is not supposed to be digesting in the middle of night. When that happens, because you ate something right before you're going to sleep, then you'll have the acid churning in the stomach, and when you lie down, the acid creeps up. You're not supposed to do that. And if the acid is churning, then sometimes other things will occur. It's just not healthy. So 2 hours before sleep, nothing to eat. That might mean that you cut out your snack at night, your midnight snack, or not watch TV and have popcorn. I tell you, I love popcorn. When I go to movie theaters, I just love the popcorn. But I love potato chips. But because I can't stop when I have popcorn or potato chips around me, I try to ask my loved ones not to have it in the house. Because when it's in the house and I'm tired, I see it, I'm going to go eat it, and I will be nonstop, just like a zombie, going like this. Because that's the way those trans fats, the chips, the salt, that's the way the carbohydrates work. And the companies know that. The cookie companies know that. The chip companies know that. The beer companies know that, the beer nuts. So they know that you once you get the first taste, especially with that crunch or that bite or that break of the cookie or the bread, you will have the turn on of insulin, and you'll feel really good, and you'll want to have more and more. In fact, Coke or pop, you know how they formulate pop, and I talk about this all the time for my pop users. One of the highest components of pop is salt, especially in Coke. And you wouldn't think that. Coke, Pepsi, you wouldn't think that's salty because it tastes so creamy and caramelized. Well, what does salt do when you take it? It makes you thirsty. So if you have the pop and it's high salt, but you can't taste the salt, you can taste the cream, and you can taste the fizz, and you can taste the, well, what's going to happen is you're going to be thirsty for another one in a couple hours. That's the way the food works. It initiates this kind of response hormonally, and the companies know that when you eat that and have that hormone response, and then the insulin drops, you're going to hunt for more. What are you going to hunt for? Same thing. So that's what the hunting reflex is, and it's just hard to stop once it gets turned on. Those are the power. That's the power of hormones. Again, insulin, dopamine, cortisol, they're all useful hormones. You ask any Olympian athlete, they rely on those hormones, but they also feed those hormones the right way, and they also treat those hormones with respect. Now, people who go home and just eat a ton of stuff, drink a lot of beer, have a lot of pop, well, you might have that when you're 20 because you can burn off, and I think the testosterone, estrogen is high enough that it can take some of that crap, but continue that into your 30s and 40s, you're asking for diabetes, you're asking for cholesterol, you're asking for high blood pressure, and usually if you don't do anything and you just take the medicines that all my colleagues give, in another 10 years you're asking for heart attack, cancer, and stroke. And guess what? In the United States, top 3 killers, heart attack, cancer, and stroke. So you have to be careful about where you're going. And if you wait for the symptoms to come up, you're not going to feel them till it's too late. You'll see the symptoms slowly accumulate, like a big belly, snoring at night, burping and farting a lot, acne, fatigue, brain fog, all that stuff will slowly accumulate one at a time. And what do we usually say? Oh, you're old, it's just your age, take a pill, everybody else takes it. But that's not the case. I have a lot of guys on my summit boards that actually make changes and feel good just with nutrition. We should really treat the grocery store has the first pharmacy, and then the vitamin shop has a second pharmacy. I like Fruitful Yield, Whole Foods, and then your pharmacy has the rescue, only your rescue. You do the rescue stuff while you're changing your life, so that hopefully if you change your life and they're successful with it, then you can get off the rescue stuff. So the final thing, I'll keep this short, but well, this is not really short, but the final thing would be that you should not eat in anger. You should not eat while standing. And I've been known to sometimes, after doing long hours and filming videos when I should be going home, and it's okay, I love doing this, I go home real fast and I'm mindful before I go home, and I eat over the sink, or I eat alone. And I usually try to take my time, but that's just the circumstances. I've sacrificed my family life for that, but I love what I do. However, when you eat in anger, or you eat in a fury of speed, that food that you just ate, because you were turning on the stress response, it just still goes to the wrong place. If you turn on the stress response, your fuel sources will be ready and available as fast as possible. And that means the fuel sources are usually going to go to your battery, and the battery is the fat stores, instead of going to muscle and brain and hormone. So I think it was Lou Arona did studies where he measured the insulin responsiveness of somebody taking a mostly low glycemic index food, well-balanced macronutrients, and grinding it up into a shake or liquid, and then drinking the meal down. And it was interesting because he found that even though it was a healthy meal, the body still thought of it as a high insulin dump, or gave it a high insulin dump. So the same thing can be said if you're under stress. If you're being beat up and you're being forced to eat, the fuel's going in, the fuel will get absorbed improperly, and then the fuel building blocks that it breaks down to the digestive system, if it can break it down, will be stored in the wrong way. It'll be available for the wrong things. So it's said that even if you eat a healthy diet but you're under stress, it's just as bad as eating an unhealthy diet. So you might as well, if you're going to be stressed out, eat an unhealthy diet. No, I wouldn't do that. I'd say it still sets you up for habit, but you just have to take care of the stress. So calming practice for taking care of stress, and also eating at peace, eating with family, joking around. You know, Italy, when I visited Italy, I found that people would sit around and eat for a long amount of time, and they go out and smoke, come back in, talk again a little bit. They would take a long time, and Italy has less heart disease than we have. I talked to an Italian cardiologist when I was there, and he said that their biggest problem is more the smoking causing heart disease than the eating causing heart disease. And honestly, I didn't see that many obese Italians. Here I do in the United States, but over there I did, and everybody walks around too. Seventh-day Adventists always walk around. Stress is calm. So, and that's the other thing to practice, not that another pointer, but a calming practice is important. If you have a calming practice, even not related to eating, calming practice at night, calming practice in the morning, then you'll have serotonin that's stable all day long. Because if serotonin is enough and high enough, good serotonin can thwart any adrenaline, cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine. But you have to have a practice. I gave somebody a suggestion like this. If you meditate or have breath exercise, like my 4-7-8 breath recording, at least 5 to 15 to 30 minutes at night and 5 to 15 to 30 minutes in the morning, then it gives you this sense of serotonin for a couple hours. Think of this. When you have an orgasm, not that I'm going to mix orgasm and food, but I've heard of the events. When you have an orgasm, it lasts only a second. I mean, having sex lasts a while, but having an orgasm only lasts a couple seconds. But that couple seconds of orgasm will actually have a serotonin rush and an oxytocin rush that'll last you a couple hours. So imagine, and that's the same feeling you get after yoga. Breath exercise is done for about an hour, and you feel great after yoga. Same thing with meditation. For those of you who meditate, you know, if you meditate on these immersions, like at the Chopra Center twice a day, people walk around in the middle of the day just happy and shaking hands and hugging all the time because they feel great. They've been in practice. So if you can have an orgasm, if you can meditate in the morning, well, if you can have an orgasm in the morning and at night, that'd be great. It might be tired and happy, but why not? That probably wouldn't be productive. It wouldn't be productive to have an orgasm with sex. It would be productive to be happy. You'd be more productive if you have the mindful practice, but you have to find a mindful practice. It is so hard to get somebody to do mindful practice or even admit to it. I usually find that everybody is wanting to listen or see a psychologist. I think psychologists are great, but I think we have this stigma. So just try to find your own thing. If you just do yoga, well, that means you're going to have to do an hour of yoga to get that same feeling twice a day, and nobody has an hour to do yoga twice a day. Well, some people probably, but I don't. I'd rather go to the truncated form of getting to that orgasmic state with breath exercise, and I do that. So try to develop your own routine, but that's the value, because if you eat your meal calm, you digest calm, it goes to the right places, and you also take care of hunger later on. If you're calm and not stressed out, especially after you finish work, then usually you're not hunting for food. One of the the biggest reasons for hunting for food at night is because I hated my job, or I'm so frustrated with traffic, I'm gonna go have this beer, I'm gonna have a cupcake. Because your body, when it's looking for, or chocolate, when it's looking for satisfaction because of stress or starvation or other things, it'll hunt for the fastest relief possible. The fastest relief possible is going to be food or alcohol. So, and the same thing with nicotine, and that's why people have addictions. So the only problem is food, it accumulates. Alcohol will wear off and damage the liver, and that's a lot of calories. Nicotine will give you satisfaction for a short amount of time, but all that tar that you inhale, it will eventually cause problems with the lung. It's just a lot of damage. And by the way, if you smoke marijuana, same thing. There's the same theoretical amount of tar, although that'll make you feel real good and calm and peaceful, but then the tar. I'd rather have you guys vape. So watch my video on CBD. So it is important to do all that stuff. So obviously we're moving from what should I eat to how should I eat it and what time should I eat. So this is all involved. That's why, Anthony, it's so hard to figure out one diet of what should I eat, give me the list. It doesn't work that way. I wish I could tell you. I didn't mean to not answer you, but just understand that. If we want to get into the details because of somebody else having to shop for you, I think now it's now time to get a coach to go with you to the grocery or come up with a list for you, figure out what is in your budget, figure out what your mom likes to cook, or figure out what the rest of the family likes to eat. See who else has a restriction in the family, so we know what to do. You can't just say, don't eat this, don't eat this. I mean, it'd be nice, but it's close to impossible. So, good question, Anthony. Hopefully, this gives you a little bit of guidance. I have my go-tos as far as nutrition. My biggest go-to is going to be the hospital because it's covered by insurance, but I feel that sometimes my patients don't, for some reason, get satisfaction when they go to the hospital. There is good information, but I love the guys at TNF. Maritza and Freddie are doing a great job with educating, empowering with exercise, kind of putting the exercise and diet together, and then also hopefully doing a mindful practice over there. I'm going to go visit one of these days. So, good question. I really appreciate you watching. Don't forget to subscribe down below, but stay subscribed and you'll be able to see the next time we go in the clinic.